From One of One Production Studios, broadcasting from NYC, you are listening to Unexpected Success with your host, Joy.
Welcome back, guys, to another episode of Unexpected Success with me, your host, Joy. In the studio today, I came out to Baltimore, Maryland to interview and speak with the great Billy Murphy. Hi, Billy.
How are you?
I'm great. And thanks so much again for agreeing to be on the podcast.
Oh, it's my great pleasure.
I'm pretty nervous now that we're rolling because I just I'm so happy that you agreed to do this. So, Billy Murphy has been a lifelong advocate of civil rights. He has, for the most part, dedicated his whole life to fighting on behalf of people who could not fight for themselves. And what a fulfilling role that you've played in this community in Baltimore and in life in general. So I just want to take some time to get to know how you ended up becoming the great Billy Murphy and talk about your background and the steps you took to become who you are today.
Well, greatness is in the eye of the beholder, and the worst thing that a person can do is look in the mirror and say, "You great." Although Ali proved that you could do both, right?
Right, of course.
I owe everything I have, everything I've ever done to my mother and father, and I just thank God that He put me in that family. I could have been born in a hollow log, drinking muddy water, but He gave me a great father and a great mother. They were both freedom fighters, highly principled, knew the history of black people's interaction with the Western world, knew why we were in the position we are today, and they taught me most of what I know. Everybody comes into the world with their own personality, and I came in as a warrior. I mean, I have a sun in Taurus, moon in Sagittarius, and I talk back to the police and to the judges. It's just second nature with me.
Right.
But being born in that family put me where I am today. I mean, if I had not had my father's wisdom, I'd be a different person. If I hadn't had my mother's love and wisdom, because, women really know how to love. Men have to learn how to love from women. I wouldn't be where I am today. So I owe everything to them.
And your dad...
And to God for giving me them.
Right. And your dad was one of the first black judges, right, in his day. I mean, how... and your mom, was an activist as well. I guess, that's huge, right? So you say that, and that obviously has a profound impact on who we become, who our parents are. Can you speak more to, I guess, the lessons you may have learned from them and how you, I guess, had the confidence to become what you've become?
Well, let me put it this way. Let me make an analogy. When we were free, we were kind of like lions patrolling a territory where they were the masters of the territory. They had no natural enemies. They conquered everything in their path, and they were free.
Right.
But imagine this lion running into a rope trap where he's suddenly hanging from a tree, and he's taken to America to be put in a cage. What is his mentality? He is mad as hell.
Right.
He knows what he just lost. He profoundly understands that being in a cage and being free are radically different states of being, states of mind, with different outcomes. Being in a cage is a remarkably repressive thing. But he knows what he lost, and he's angry about it, and if that door to that cage cracks, he's gonna run out and kill everything in his path to get his freedom back.
Right.
That's what, give me freedom or death, or give me death was one of the founding fathers' credos. Well, that's how that lion felt. But his son's born in the cage with him. Doesn't know freedom except from the stories his father told.
Right.
Has the anger of his father, but without the experience of what was taken. But he's angry.
Never experienced
He wants to get
freedom.
out of the cage too.
Right,
but when
right.
the grandson is born in the cage, is much more moderated. He knows less about freedom than either his grandfather or his father. And we're the 7th generation of lions born in a cage. And so, since we have been more recently put back into real cages, we are isolated in profound ways from the rest of the world.
Right.
Prison life becomes life. Segregation becomes life. Slavery becomes life. It's a total reconditioning of the mentality of a human being, the same as that reconditioning of that lion. And so we don't know freedom. We don't know what's been taken from us. Malcolm X used to say it. He said, I don't want to be, he would quote black people saying, I don't want to go back to Africa. And he would say, Negro, you left your mind in Africa. And that's what he meant. I mean, we were free people there.
No, of course.
And we're no longer free. Our leaders were our same color. They came from us. But being in a cage for these many generations, 250 years of being in a physical cage and a mental cage, a segregation cage, and now recaged physically in a profound way that has speeded the destruction of the black family, of the black man, prevented him from being a provider, prevented him from being a father, prevented him from being a leader, prevented him from owning a business, and prevented him from gaining wealth and power, all very deliberately aimed at us so that we would remain lions in a cage, 7th generation.
Controlled.
And so when you look at it this way, then you understand what has happened to us. You understand why the prisoner says, shut the door. Where's my food? What's wrong with you? My food isn't here on time.
Right.
And when they come out, after knowing only a caged life during their formative years, the free world is a hostile environment.
Right.
They haven't learned how to deal with their freedom, to develop their freedom, to capitalize on their freedom. They haven't learned how to deal with their power, to develop their power, and to capitalize on their power. They haven't learned how to be family men and build a powerful legacy just by building children who can better deal with the world. That's who we are now.
Right. And, and I think, and obviously we see the effects of that, and even social media, how big social media is now, and how people are just living they're just surface. Everything is surface. No one is dealing with the realities of, I guess it's a product of cage life, right? It's a product of...
How else can you explain it?
Right.
Look, we know that if you keep a people freedomless for long enough, they adjust to not having freedom. What choice do they have? If you have superior might and you put us in cages, mental and physical, for 250, 60, 70, close to 300 years, that's how we're going to come out. It's inevitable that we come out this way.
Right.
And people talk about how is slavery relevant? Well, slavery is part of the initial process of turning us from lions into house cats. Because that's what we are now. Fangless lions. Declawed, detoothed, who don't see freedom the way a free person can see it. Don't see the endless possibilities of freedom.
Right.
Because it's been bred out of us. You know, we're more a domesticated animal than a free human being at this point in our journey.
But in talking
It's
to
tragic.
you, I mean, you still have your claws. So I guess, what did your parents teach you to keep you, because you're not angry, but you're determined.
No, I'm angry too.
Okay. Well, anger works.
My struggle has been a lifelong battle with anger. How can you not be angry if you see it the way I've just laid it out?
Right.
And it's the truth to everybody except white folks who've never learned about what happened to us. It's the truth except to black folks who have not been taught the history of why we're in the position we are in today. What was that process? Now, if white folks were the victims of mass incarceration, they would have taken up arms long ago, because a free people will not be put into cages without massive resistance. That original lion,
Right.
massive resistance to it, with every fiber in his body. But what do? Is this massive resistance to mass incarceration that we're seeing coming from the black
No.
community?
No.
No. It's the response of people who are used to being in a cage after first being a mighty lion.
Right.
And then the mythology of white male supremacy is such that we never knew we were mighty lions. They don't know we were mighty lions.
Right.
They don't have any understanding of
we've
what we were
always
like
been-
when we were stolen from Africa. They have no concept of it.
And they don't want to
neither
know.
do we.
And they don't. But they don't want to know.
They don't know to know.
Right.
It's not important the way they've been living. They've been benefiting from these lions in the cage at tremendous social cost to America. I mean, how can you take a people and then render them basically unproductive by design? By putting them in mental and physical cages,
Right.
taking away their freedom.
And then also assigning labels like lazy or, all the assigned labels, that have been given to black folks.
Let me make this
and
analogy
brown
again.
folks, right?
If you've been in a cage for 7 generations, your desire to hunt has disappeared. Your food is being brought to you in a cage. If you've been used to being powerful, but then your power becomes irrelevant, what happens to you? You adjust to the irrelevancy of your own personal power. You live without hope. If you've been in a cage for 7 generations and nothing has worked to get you out of the cage, and as a matter of fact, in this last 2 generations, the cages have gotten more frequent physically and worse, then you live in a world where you feel powerless to make change. You're no longer revolutionary. You've adjusted. Your
Right.
psychology is not revolutionary psychology like that first lion or the second one born in a cage who could hear the tales of free life. Now you're used to it. You've adjusted. The fight is gone in you. When you see the strong man
That's
emerging who
fascinating.
is a racist, you kowtow to him instead of fighting him because you're afraid of the consequences that have been built up generationally up to the present time of being a fighting man, of being a warrior.
So it's interesting you say that, because I think that the real reason why I started the podcast is that in scrolling through social media, I kept on seeing all the hopelessness, all of the people who are, responding to the current administration, people who are just saying we can't have anything, people complaining, everyone kind of being fear-based, being scared to do anything, with all of the black men that have been killed, including Freddie Gray, right, in the hands of police. The fear that creates, the messaging, what that makes people want to do, everything just seems so fear-based. And I wanted to highlight stories of people who beat the odds, who were successful despite the fear, despite the consequences. Now, you've always advocated for civil rights in the face of fear, and what kind of courage that takes.
No, that's not correct. Let me tell you why.
Okay.
My mother was fearless. My father was fearless. They carried themselves that way. They talked back to power their entire lives. They came from homes of living history where Mark Twain was a good friend of my mother's grandfather, and
Wow.
on my father's side, the Afro-American newspaper was born. And so I grew up in a household full of history. The people who taught me were lions who had escaped. My great-grandfather started the Afro, was an escaped slave who fought in the Civil War, came to Baltimore because he met a pretty woman, decided to settle down, and in his 60s started the
Wow.
Baltimore Afro-American newspaper, which lasted under his leadership until the early 20s when the lion he trained, Carl Murphy, took over and was one of the leaders of the civil rights movement. So I was designed to
I
succeed.
mean, blown away.
I
Right.
was designed to succeed. Fearlessness was normal in my family. I thought it was normal behavior until I started dealing with the rest of the world. I thought advocacy and telling the truth to power was normal. I didn't have a normal upbringing. I was raised by lions who had escaped from captivity. Now, were they still confined, roughly speaking? Absolutely. Were they the victims of segregation? Absolutely. But they had the ability to shape the paths not only of their own lives, but of lots of people around them. So the Afro became an institution. I was on the board of directors for the Afro for many years, and I represented the Afro. And, you know, I understood the power of the press, and I understood the power of the messaging to the black community. That's why I minored in propaganda theory when I went to MIT, because I wanted to improve the messaging. We weren't being effective messengers, either inwardly about how to get out of this cage, where the soft spots were, how to beat the trustees, you know, who were the fellow members of the cage group who were doing the bidding of whites to keep us docile and under control. You know, we
So take me to
life for me was
just
totally different.
So yeah, that's what I want. So
you know?
so how were you as a boy before? I mean, now granted, I mean, you went to MIT. I mean, it blows my mind. And you went to MIT
in 1960.
In 1960, right? You
Uh-huh.
went to MIT in 1960. So how were you as a boy? Curious? Like how would you describe
My
yourself?
mother and father always kept me busy. That's the key to raising kids. It's the key of making sure they don't get in a bad environment. They always gave me interesting things to do. I was forced to learn the piano. I didn't learn it well. I rebelled. I've always been a rebel.
Right.
But I took up drums in response to the love of music that I learned from my father and my mother. My mother was into bebop. My father was into Shostakovich and the classics. And they wanted me to have a musical background, so I had that. My mother was a painter. Her aunt was a great painter whose pictures hung in the Louvre for many years.
Oh, wow.
Laura Wheeler Waring. And so I took up painting as a kid. My life was rich.
So you were creative. You were doing a lot of
Well, it was
creative.
guided creativity.
Right.
You know, because I was a rambunctious, freedom-loving kid that was disobedient at every opportunity, talked back to my father,
Right.
talked back to my mother, who was much more willing audience, by the way.
Right. Sure.
And you know, they kept me isolated from the evil in the community by making sure I was always doing something that I learned to love.
And so you have siblings?
Yeah, 4.
4. Okay.
Yeah.
What's the makeup?
My sister Madeline's a year and a half younger than me, very much involved in the struggle. Was the head of art and culture for Chicago under Harold Washington, member of his cabinet, and then under Mayor Sawyer, who succeeded Washington after he died, and then Mayor Daley. And she's been an integral member of the community. When I first met Barack Obama, he said, "Do you have a sister named Laura?" I said, "How you know my sister?" And this was before he won Iowa.
Wow.
Where, you know, the typical turnout for a fundraiser
Yeah.
for him was like 40. And so I waited till last, and I wanted to find out what his thinking was. How did he
Right.
see a path forward to become the first black president? And so I said, "How do you know my sister Laura?" He says, "I am a U.S. Senator. She lobbies me on behalf of the ACLU relentlessly.
Wow.
I've had many meetings with her. She's helped me craft legislation. She's helped me to become the senator that I am today, which means you have a sister named Madeline, right?" I said, "Yeah, you know Madeline." She said, "Well, I'm from Chicago, and when I first got into politics on a local level, she gave me some of my earliest money and continued to support me to the point where I am now. So yeah, I know your family." Well, that's a hell of a thing.
I mean, that's
now, that didn't
huge.
give me a tight relationship with the president,
right,
don't get me
right.
wrong. You know, but
it says so much about your parents.
yeah, but that's the kind of family I came from. So I'm supposed to succeed. I was programmed to succeed. I remember when, see, everything was preparation for integration when I was going through elementary school, all black elementary school. And Brown versus Board of Education was decided in '54. Baltimore decided to integrate starting around 1956 or 7. And so everything that my mother and father did was to prepare us, be excellent at what you do. And I'll give you an illustration. I came home with a 95 in my first year of integrated schools in the math course. And I was brimming with, my chest was out. I couldn't wait to tell my mother first,
Right.
and then my father, who worked hard. I'd see him first for breakfast, and then I'd see him for dinner, and then he'd go back to his law office and continue to practice until 10 o'clock at night. He went to bed like clockwork every night at 10 o'clock. So I couldn't wait to show him. So my mother looks at me and she said, yeah, 95, but why are you smiling? I said, Mama, it's an A.
Right.
She said, you must not understand what 95 means. It means you had the capacity to understand all the material, but you fell 5% short. You didn't master that last 5%.
Your mom.
Son, don't bring me any more 95s. Do you understand me? Well, I love my mother, and I wanted to please her, so I didn't bring her any more 95s. I started bringing home hundreds, and that's how I got into the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. But suppose I was raised differently. See, this is a blessing that I've had. And they taught me service. They taught me giving was the answer. They taught me struggle was the answer. They taught me to be a warrior. And without them, I wouldn't be me. Without them, I would be somebody totally different. I might be a lion that never escaped from the cage and had the mentality of a caged animal. So it's a blessing.
I guess, it's a huge blessing. What advice do you give to people that didn't have your parents? How do they get out the cage? If they aspire to be something, but they did not have that example, how do they make it out?
Well, there's the concept of I think God has put us all in a position, no matter how humble our backgrounds are, to be other people's angel in certain situations. How often have you just run into somebody in a critical time of your life who guided you in the right direction, who was less than perfect?
So many times.
And see, look, there's nothing perfect about me. I'm still a work in progress. And so I think God has put me in a position, given my tremendous imperfections, which I will not discuss.
I wouldn't ask you to, not in this podcast.
To get people out of the worst problems they have in their life, because that's what I've been doing for 48 years. And they taught me that. My mother and father taught me that. And so I watched them help people. Look, let me tell you my father's mentality. He came from a very privileged background, middle class black, not free. He was kind of escape line who was permitted to have some kind of freedom, but not total freedom. He could wear nice clothes. He could live in a nice house.
Right.
But he was still confined to a certain neighborhood. He couldn't practice law in white society, until very late in his life. He had to be admitted to the University of Maryland School of Law by court order in 1941.
Wow.
I mean, so free is an overstatement.
Right.
But, he was able to recall the tales of freedom and to teach them effectively to us so that we could be warriors. My mother was a warrior. Her nickname was Geronimo. That's what the white folks start calling her.
I love it.
So, when you're in a house like that, and you're service-oriented, you give back the way you are taught to give back. And that is, you solve the problems that oppressed people have, in my case, in the criminal justice system. The last thing I want to see is for one of my clients to get ensnared in this system.
Right.
So I've always had the motivation to win. You know, I was naturally egocentric. And so here this person needs help, comes to this egocentric guy who's just super competitive. Not perfect, because ego is the enemy. And I have this commitment that none of my clients get involved in this system. None of them. I wanted to win every case, still do.
Right.
And so that's how I've been able to give back to the community of caged lions.
Right.
You know.
And so, and I guess, you know, in that, you know, you're speaking to the fact that your natural ability, you are competitive by nature, right? You don't want to lose. And you've been able to leverage those natural abilities and your God-given talent, really, to build a successful career.
Well, everybody has sometimes profoundly different motivations for why they find themselves in the position I find myself. Johnny Cochran, for example, one of my heroes, found himself in the position basically, and I don't want to compare myself to somebody greater than me. You know, that's always a mistake.
You know, everything is relative.
But Johnny's gift to mankind was his love of human beings. And it was less ego that got Johnny to where he was. It was more love.
Right.
And, you know, he was a profoundly competitive person. He ain't take any crap off anybody. He had courage. And he got it from a different combination of events than I got it. And what he gave back to the community was so profound that I still look up to him.
Wow.
But he came at freedom and being a freedom fighter from a slightly different perspective than me. He had poor parents. He learned freedom from other teachers in the community.
Right, angels.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, angels.
Right.
People who come into your life with a purpose unknown to both of you.
Right, right.
Who play a profound role in saving you for something or teaching you something profound, so that you can live a higher level of existence.
So it's interesting. So I think that's the answer, right? But for young people who were not born into the parents that you had, right? If you pay attention to the people that are around you and the messaging, the positive messaging, then angels can come. Angels appear, I believe, for everyone. It just depends on whether or not you are in a space to be able to hear the message.
Well, what they taught me was this. I mean, they taught me so much. I mean, we can't cover it all in a podcast.
Right, right.
And that's not even the aim. But let me see if I can get to the high points. I come in using that level of confidence that I learned from my mother and father to solve the problems of black people as they bring them to me in ways that have never been done before. I never regarded myself as amazing. I was doing what I was trained to do. I was trained to bring excellence into the situation.
Right.
And so one of the things that I stress in all of my interactions with our people and with anybody, because we're all human, we all come from the same root, we're all Africans. We just been living in different places for a long time. But, you know, the scientists, white scientists, have discovered, much to the chagrin of some of them who've tried to disprove this without success, that we all come from Africa.
Right.
We were originally dark-skinned people in Africa who migrated to populate the rest of the world. And the more we discover about that, the truer that becomes. And the genetics have proven it. You know, white geneticists say, oh my God, the mitochondrial DNA, which runs with the mother in every generation, traces back to Africa.
Right.
There's another genetic test that was developed to try to disprove that, which ended up proving it once again. So geneticists don't disagree that we come from Africa, all of us, which makes racism so stupid.
Stupid, I know. It's so stupid.
Because we all come from Africa. But you see, we got to deal with the ignorance of modern life. And ignorance is rampant. Look, we don't know the history as black people of how we got here.
Right. No.
We don't know we descend from mighty lions who were free. We don't know that. It's not taught in school.
It's definitely not
Teaching
taught
us
in
about some of what the white folks think is significant about black folks. You know, George Washington carving the peanut. And, you know, it sounds absurd if you know the fuller history. What about Denmark Vesey, who led slave rebellions to try to get his freedom for his people back? What about all of the whites who hated slavery as much as we did, who fought against it and ended up taking us to war over that very question?
Right.
We don't know this history. It's mistaught or ignored. And so whites don't know about us being the seventh generation in a cage, and that the cages have gotten bigger, stronger, and longer in the interim. They don't understand the impact that has on our psychology, and neither do we.
No, it's so good. Okay.
And so everybody's throwing these alleged solutions at us,
Right.
which all fail to deal with the difference in our psychology. What we need as veterans of the wars in this country against our freedom is a different kind of education, which teaches about the original lion, the second generation lion in the cage, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, and the seventh, why we're in the position today. And one of the things that seventh generation lions do not do is they do not have high aim. How could they?
Yeah, and I actually want to spend a lot more time on the high aim, the concept of high aim. I think I'm going to break here just for the purpose of keeping the podcast to a certain length, and we're going to start part 2 shortly. So, thanks, guys, for tuning in to another episode of Unexpected Success with me, your host, Joy. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, YouTube, and Podbean. Hit subscribe and leave a review once you've listened. Until next time, keep winning. See you in part 2.
This podcast was brought to you by 23DB Productions, ID Productions, and One of One Productions. For more information, go to Facebook and Instagram, Unexpected Success with Joy.